Imagine tearing down the highway in an Oldsmobile 442, feeling the power of a 400 horsepower V8 beneath you, or cruising in the one-year wonder, the Rallye 350, in a blazing yellow that nobody could ignore. But what made these cars not just fast but legendary? Was it the performance, the styling, or something else entirely? Let's find out which Oldsmobile truly defined the muscle car era. Number 10, the 1949 Oldsmobile Rocket 88. The 1949 Oldsmobile Rocket 88 is often overshadowed by icons like the Pontiac GTO and the Mustang, but it laid the groundwork for what we now call the muscle car. It may not have had the flashy, rebellious attitude we associate with muscle cars today, but it definitely packed a punch. In fact, this car is so legendary that it even inspired one of the first rock and roll songs. Jackie Brenston's Rocket 88. How cool is that? Let's rewind to 1949, when Oldsmobile came up with a simple yet brilliant idea. Take a small car and drop in a powerful engine. This formula would go on to define the muscle car segment for decades. While it wasn't called a muscle car back then, the Rocket 88 was fast, affordable, and stylish enough to turn heads. It brought high-performance driving to everyday people, not just racers or the elite. Speaking of performance, the heart of this beast was the Rocket V8 engine, designed by GM engineer Charles Kettering. Kettering was already a legend for his work on the electric starter and leaded gasoline, but it took him over 20 years to develop this powerhouse. The engine was a 303 cubic inch V8 producing 135 horsepower and a hefty 263 pounds per foot of torque. Now you might think, 135 horsepower? That's not much, but back then it was a game changer. The Rocket 88 could hit 97 miles per hour and go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 13 seconds. A big deal for a car that also served as a practical family vehicle. Curiosity Loop 1. But what made this seemingly simple car so revolutionary for its time? Could it have been the engine or the way it captured the public's imagination? Well, in NASCAR's debut season, the Rocket 88 won 5 of the 8 Grand National races. That's right, it was a race-winning machine. And for several years, competitors were left in the dust trying to catch up with Oldsmobile's new engine technology. So, what do you think? Did the Rocket 88 set the stage for the muscle car era? But before the muscle cars took center stage, Oldsmobile was already making waves with a different kind of powerhouse. In 1961, they introduced the Starfire, a car that blended luxury and performance like never before, setting the stage for the muscle car revolution to come. This car was Oldsmobile's answer to the growing demand for luxury and performance. The Starfire was introduced as a sleek, all-new model with its stunning convertible design and loaded with features that made it stand out from the crowd. And let's not forget, Oldsmobile wasn't just following trends, they were setting them. Now, what made the Starfire so special? Well, first off, it was Oldsmobile's flagship model in 1961. Priced at a whopping $4,647, which is about $47,381 in today's money. That made it the most expensive Oldsmobile of the time, more expensive than even their larger 98 models. But if you were in the market for a grand tourer, the Starfire delivered in style and luxury. Under the hood, it packed a powerful 394 cubic inch V8, Oldsmobile's strongest engine that year. The 394 cubic inch Skyrocket V8 wasn't just for show. It produced 330 horsepower at 4,600 RPM, making sure the Starfire had the muscle to back up its bold looks. But here's a fun fact. It was also the first U.S. full-size production car to feature an automatic transmission with a console-mounted floor shifter. And let's talk about those luxurious details. The Starfire came loaded with leather bucket seats, a center console with a tachometer, fender skirts, and power everything. Power windows, power seats, power steering, and even power brakes. So, do you think the Starfire, with its bold and luxurious features, was ahead of its time? By 1961, Oldsmobile was capitalizing on space-age optimism with its rocket branding, and the Starfire was part of that push. While it may have shared some parts with the dynamic 88 and Super 88, its custom touches and the feeling of driving something from the future really set it apart. Unfortunately, Oldsmobile only sold 1,500 units in 1961, which makes this classic gem a rare sight today. But for those lucky enough to own one, the Starfire represents a blend of luxury and performance that was truly revolutionary. It's a car that would turn heads and still do so today. Wouldn't you love to own one of these classic beauties? But when you think of turbocharged cars, the 1962 Oldsmobile Jetfire might not be the first one that comes to mind, but it should be. This car was bold, innovative, and pushed the boundaries, even if it didn't get the fame it deserved at the time. It was a car from the early 60s that featured a factory-installed turbocharger. Sounds ahead of its time, right? Well, it was. Oldsmobile's Jetfire was the first turbocharged passenger car to hit the streets, coming out alongside Chevy's turbocharged Monza Spyder Corvair. The Americans were diving into turbo tech way before the Europeans caught up. But here's where things get tricky. The technology was far from perfect. Turbochargers back then were prone to problems like pre-ignition, detonation, and oil pressure issues, making them unreliable. And the Jetfire? Well, let's just say it earned a reputation for being a bit of a headache. Beneath that sleek exterior was a 215 cubic inch V8 engine, and when the turbo kicked in, this baby cranked out 215 horsepower, giving you 1 horsepower for every cubic inch of displacement. That's not just impressive for the early 60s. That's the kind of power that makes your heart race at every stoplight. With a 0 to 60 miles per hour time around 8 seconds, this car was fast enough to keep pace with even the mighty Corvette of the time. But here's the twist. Oldsmobile added something called the Turbo Rocket fuel tank. Sounds cool, doesn't it? In reality, it was a mix of distilled water, methanol, and an anti-corrosion agent meant to keep the turbo running smoothly. The problem is that this system often leaked, and drivers had to remember to refill it regularly. Forgetting to do so could lead to serious engine issues. Do you think you'd remember to top off your rocket fuel? Finding a Jetfire today is tough. With only around 200 estimated to still exist, it's a rare gem. If you do come across one, expect to pay anywhere from $45,000 to $60,000, or even more for pristine examples. But imagine the pride of owning the world's first turbocharged production car. Just imagine popping that hood at a car show. The turbo enthusiasts would go nuts. As the automotive landscape evolved, Oldsmobile knew it had to keep pace with the changing tides of performance and style. Then came the 1964 442, a bold statement that combined power, agility, and the spirit of competition, forever changing the definition of what a muscle car could be. Originally an option package for the F85 and Cutlass, the 442 got its name from its key features: a 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhausts. It was Oldsmobile's answer to performance-hungry buyers who wanted something that could go toe-to-toe with Pontiac's GTO. Oldsmobile took its 330 cubic inch V8 engine and pushed it to 310 horsepower with various tweaks, including a high-lift camshaft and heavier-duty components. The car handled just as well as it performed, thanks to a heavy-duty suspension system that improved handling and road grip. This combination of speed and agility made the 442 more than just a straight-line performer. It could handle the corners too. Though the 1964 442 was a bit more conservative than its GTO rival, it could still hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.5 seconds and reach a top speed of 116 miles per hour. Only 2,999 of these were sold in its debut year, making it a rare find today. With its sharp looks, potent engine, and solid handling, the 1964 442 set the stage for Oldsmobile's future in the muscle car arena. It was about delivering a balanced performance that combined speed, handling, and a bit of everyday usability. Now let's talk about a car that tends to fly under the radar in muscle car history. 1969, Hurst Oldsmobile 442, Convertible. Now when you think muscle cars, names like Ford, Dodge, and Pontiac dominate the conversation. But Oldsmobile? Not so much. That's where this beauty steps in. with power and rarity that'll make any car lover's heart race. Oldsmobile, known for big cruisers your grandparents probably drove, actually had some serious muscle, especially with the 442 and the Hurst Olds collaboration. The Hurst Olds came about because Olds needed to keep up with the competition, and GM's rule of no engines over 400 cubic inches was holding them back. So Olds teamed up with Hurst to find a workaround, fitting the car with a massive 455 cubic inch engine that gave it 390 horsepower and 500 pounds per feet of torque. If it was 1969, I bet you would be wishing yourself cruising down the street with the top down, the roar of that engine under the hood, the wind in your hair, and heads turning everywhere you go. This car could hit 0 to 60 in just under 6 seconds, which was blazing fast for the time. It wasn't just a showstopper on the street, it also made an appearance at the 1969 Daytona 500, with Miss Hurst herself, Linda Vaughn, waving from the back while George Hurst drove. Only 3 of these convertibles were ever made, making them some of the rarest muscle cars out there. One was destroyed, but the other 2, they're still out there, tucked away in private collections. Now let's take a trip back to 1968 when the Oldsmobile 442 really came into its own. For the first time, the 442 wasn't just an option package, it became its own model, and that move made waves in the muscle car world. Over 33,000 of these beauties were sold in 1968, each one ready to take on the streets with pure muscle under the hood. Now, Oldsmobile kept the 400 cubic inch engine from previous years, but they gave it some serious tweaks. Even though the engine displacement didn't change, the power delivery did. It was based on the newer 455 V8, which meant more torque at lower RPMs, making it a real force to be reckoned with. Curiosity Loop 2. Let me ask you, have you ever experienced the raw power of a muscle car? The 68 442 might be the one that convinced you. Performance-wise, Car Life magazine took 442 with a 3.421 rear axle and an automatic transmission for a spin, clocking 0 to 60 in a solid 7 seconds. The quarter mile, it ran it in 15.13 seconds at 92 miles per hour, topping out at a respectable 115 miles per hour. But here's where it gets even more exciting. If you went for the W30 package with a 4-speed and a 4.33 rear end, you could cut that quarter mile down to just 13.3 seconds at over 103 miles per hour. Talk about speed. Visually, the 6842 was a showstopper. Bronze copper engines, fire red air cleaners, and for the W30 models, you got those iconic Ram air intake hoses, feeding into special underbumper air scoops. Oh, and those red plastic fender wells? That was something else. 1968 also marked the end of an era with the last appearance of vent windows on hardtops and convertibles, but it introduced some modern touches like side marker lights and shoulder belts. The rear bumpers even had cutouts for those beefy exhaust tips, giving the 442 a signature look from every angle. So what do you think? Could the 1968 Oldsmobile 442 be the ultimate muscle car of the late 60s? But Oldsmobile wasn't about to sit back and let others steal the spotlight. They had something special up their sleeve, something that would turn heads and bend the rules, a partnership that would take their muscle car game to a whole new level. Let's go back to 1968, a year when the horsepower wars were raging and every car manufacturer was scrambling to get the biggest, baddest engines into their muscle cars. While Ford and Chrysler had no problem stuffing massive engines into their intermediates, GM had a strict policy: no engines bigger than 400 cubic inches in anything other than full-size cars, except for the Corvette. That is, until George Hurst came along. George Hurst, the man behind Hurst Shifters, wasn't just a tinkerer, he was a visionary. One day he decided to drop a 455 cubic inch engine from a Toronado into his 442 Cutlass, and it worked like magic. This caught the eye of Jack "Doc" Watson, who convinced Oldsmobile to run with the idea. And just like that, the 1968 Hurst Olds was born, a muscle car with a 455 Rocket V8 stuffed under the hood, breaking GM's own rules in the process. Now let's talk about its looks. The Hurst Olds didn't blend in with your typical Hurst Oldsmobile 442, it came in a slick Peruvian silver paint, a color borrowed from the Toronado, with striking black accents on the hood, trunk, and around the sides. Add in those white pinstripes, and you had a car that turned heads before it even revved its engine. Speaking of that engine, the 455 V8 came in two flavors: the W45 without air conditioning, cranking out 390 horsepower, and the W46 with AC, offering a slightly milder experience. Both engines were paired with a turbo hydromatic 400 transmission and Hurst's signature dual-gate shifter, letting you switch between automatic and manual shifting. When Oldsmobile first planned production, they aimed for 500 units. But as soon as dealers got a glimpse of the prototype, orders came flooding in. By the end, 515 were built, 51 club coupes and 464 sport coupes. But Oldsmobile wasn't done pushing boundaries yet. Let me take you back to 1966, when Oldsmobile was doing something no one else in America had done in nearly 30 years. They introduced the Toronado, the first front-wheel drive car since the Cord 810/812 of the late 1930s. Now you might wonder, why was this such a big deal? Well, in the world of American cars, rear-wheel drive had always been king, especially for performance cars. But Oldsmobile had a vision, and boy, did it change things. The story of the Toronado begins with a design exercise by a guy named David North, a talented Oldsmobile stylist who sketched out what he thought was just a fun concept car back in 1962. Little did he know that design would turn into one of the most iconic cars of the 60s. Initially, it was supposed to be a smaller car, but Oldsmobile wanted it to compete with luxury cruisers like the Riviera and Thunderbird. So they beefed it up, making it larger and more impressive. But Oldsmobile didn't stop at size. They wanted something truly unique. After years of tinkering with front-wheel drive systems, they decided to give the Toronado this innovative layout, making it unlike anything else on the market at the time. And under the hood, a massive 425 cubic inch Rocket V8, delivering 385 horsepower and a neck-snapping 475 pounds-per-feet of torque. Imagine the feeling of all that power being sent to the front wheels, something that was nearly unheard of back then. Now here's a question for you. Do you think front-wheel drive belongs on performance cars, or should it stick to more practical vehicles? Sure, the Toronado had its quirks, like drum brakes on all four wheels, which wasn't ideal given the car's weight. But despite that, it could still hit 0 to 62 miles per hour in just 9.5 seconds. Pretty impressive for a car tipping the scales at over 4,400 pounds. By 1967, Oldsmobile fixed the brake issue by adding front disc brakes, and from there, the Toronado continued to evolve. Today, the early models are sought after by collectors who love its daring design and groundbreaking technology. But Oldsmobile wasn't done flexing its muscle. As the competition heated up, they knew they had to take the 442 even further. That's when they unleashed the W30 package, a game changer that would push this already formidable machine to new heights. Let's take a trip back to 1970 when Oldsmobile was part of the muscle car arms race. Now, muscle cars were all about bragging rights, especially when it came to raw horsepower. Cars like the Boss 308 Mustang and Chevelle SS 454 were making waves, but Oldsmobile had its own twist on things. While the brand was known more for luxury, they decided to give their Cutlass a performance makeover and created the Oldsmobile 442. Here's the thing. When you hear 442, it might sound like engine displacement, but it's not. The name actually refers to a 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhaust. Some people even say the 2 stood for Posey two-wheel drive, but either way, it had nothing to do with the engine. Oldsmobile just wanted to stand out from the crowd. Curiosity Loop 3, but what made this version of the 442 so special that it outperformed even some of the most iconic competitors of its time? What was the secret under the hood that gave it such a monstrous edge in both speed and handling? Well, by 1970, the muscle car scene was in full swing, and Olds decided to step it up with a 455 V8 under the hood. It roared with 365 horsepower and a monstrous 500 pounds per feet of torque. You could even add the W30 package, which cranked things up to 370 horsepower. With this beast, Oldsmobile wasn't just about comfort anymore. They were hitting the racetrack hard. In fact, the W30 version was so good it ended up pacing the Indy 500 in 1970. Now let's talk performance. The W30 with a 4-speed ran a 14.2-second quarter mile at 102 miles per hour. But with Oldsmobile's engineers driving, it clocked in at 13.7 seconds. Imagine hitting that kind of speed in a car that was still considered upscale. What do you think? Could the Olds 442 hold its own against the Pontiacs and Chevelles of its day? But Oldsmobile wasn't done redefining muscle yet. Next came the 1970 Oldsmobile Rallye 350. While the name Oldsmobile might bring to mind more refined, upscale cars, they weren't shy about jumping into the muscle car craze. The Rallye 350 was their shot at offering something affordable for younger car enthusiasts who wanted muscle without the heavy insurance costs. And here's what really made it stand out. It was all yellow. Not just a splash here and there, but a bold, head-turning Sebring yellow that looked like it could light up an overcast day. Oldsmobile had already made waves with their powerful 442 and Hurst Olds models, but in 1970 they introduced the Rallye 350 for those looking for something less expensive, but still packed with style. Sure, it wasn't breaking records, but with 310 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque, it had just enough grunt to make your heart skip a beat at every stoplight. It wasn't the most powerful muscle car, but it could still get from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 7.7 seconds. Not bad for a car that cost much less than its competitors. The Rallye 350 was available with a few different options, like a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic, but all of them came with the same flashy yellow paint job, body-colored bumpers, and matching 14-inch Superstock 2 wheels. Oldsmobile thought the radical design would attract younger buyers, but that sea of yellow actually scared some people off. Now, if you were in the market back in 1970, would the bold yellow look have been too much, or would you have embraced it? Despite the styling, the Rallye 350 is now considered a classic gem. With only 3,547 units produced, it's one of the more affordable muscle cars from that golden era. You can find one today for the price of a used Toyota Camry, around $20,000 to $32,000. And with the right mods or a simple vinyl wrap, you can turn it into a car that truly reflects your style. Which Oldsmobile from this list would you love to drive the most? And is there an Oldsmobile model you think should have made the top 10? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys soon.